Trump's candidacy. Well, they're doubling, if not tripling down on them. They seem to be in a hurry to create a generation or maybe 2 generations or maybe 50 years worth of conservatives because they are just humiliating themselves over and over again. Your thoughts?
I think that's right. It's as if they didn't realize that this was going to last 4 years. They thought Inauguration Day was going to be a bad day, but then it would pass. No, this is going to go on for 4 years. And no, for the rest of us, it's Christmas every morning. It's so fantastic to have a politician who does what he says he's going to do. It's stunning. And it's been fun. As I write in Trump We Trust at some point, if you could bring back 50 prominent individuals, UN officials, presidents, cabinet secretaries, important and significant journalists, take them out of the chirogenics and set them loose in America, saying there's been signs of a new uprising of a Nazi movement. We just want you to send you out. You go find it someplace. It's the left where you would find it. It is the Women's March. It is what happened at Berkeley. It is all of these Trump supporters being beaten up during the campaign at the Trump rallies. They really are animals, and I think there are probably millions of Americans who didn't vote for Trump for a variety of reasons. They're Democrats. They wanted the first woman president. They thought Trump seemed a little wild. And they're sitting back thinking, oh my gosh, I'm glad these other people didn't win.
Once again, Ann Coulter is on with me. Her latest book, In Trump We Trust, E Pluribus Awesome. I've been flipping through it again, Ann, since Trump was inaugurated. And I have to say, it is going to go down as one of the most prescient texts in modern American life. And I flatter you from time to time because I'm a genuine fan. But it is pretty amazing how so many smart people didn't see Trump coming and they didn't understand the basis for his movement. And the most amusing thing perhaps all week for me, and it's been a very amusing week indeed, was watching all these Never Trump people celebrate over Donald Trump's Supreme Court justice pick, who was right off of his list that he put out there. This was not a surprise. He literally said this was someone that we're considering. And still the Never Trumpers were shocked that Trump made good on his word.
Yes, but not only that, throughout the campaign, one of the strangest ones was this insistence that he wasn't going to build a wall. And I guess I can't laugh and sneer about that yet, but even one of my emotionally never Trump friends, but and I don't have many, I don't know what's gotten into him, but he has a high IQ, and he kept so this isn't coming from a fan, and he kept emailing and saying, I don't understand. The wall is the simplest of Trump's promises. He's a developer. I mean, usually people are saying, I'm going to fix the economy, bring back jobs, we're going to have peace, prosperity. Oh, no, those are promises everybody's going to fill. But building a wall, it's a very simple thing. Getting Mexico to pay for it, we can take it right out of. I mean, not that anyone particularly cares. A wall is worth every penny at any price. But you could take it out of Mexico's foreign aid, as I suggest in Adios America. That's
or taxing the remittances. I mean, it's pretty easy, and we're talking 8 to 15 million. 8 to 15 billion estimate. And so even if you're a super Obama guy and want to exaggerate, we're not talking about more than $20 billion for what will no doubt be Donald Trump's signature policy. Compare that to the signature policy of Barack Obama, which was Obamacare, which is estimated something like $2 trillion over 10 years. What are we even talking about here? This wall is free. It is a free wall.
I know it totally is, but they kept saying it. I mean, serious adult people throughout the campaign, journalists would look at me and say, you don't really think he's going to build the wall. It's just a very strange behavioral tick. It's as if once a week somebody came up to you and said, you don't really think the sun is going to rise in the east. You don't think that's going to happen? How many times can I say that something obviously that is going to happen? Yes, of course we believe it's going to happen.
Yeah, well, and until we're proven wrong consistently, which we haven't been, but let's do a roundup on that. So I think Donald Trump's first couple weeks have been just about the most efficient imaginable, but they're not without its faults. I just want to get your sense overall. What are the highlights and lowlights for you in the first 2 weeks of Trump?
That's a good question. Well, the Muslim ban that isn't a ban or about Muslims.
Yeah, interesting. It's a pretty weak ban, let's just say. If the objective was to ban Muslims and they missed the biggest Muslim countries in the world, and 87% of the world's Muslim population not included in the ban. I think it was a misfire. If that was the objective, if that really was the objective.
I do think he needs to include a few more countries. The New York Times has persuaded me of that. And there is very little the New York Times has persuaded me of recently. But, they're just hysterical. That for one thing, I don't know if you knew this, Alex Marlowe, but apparently Trump doesn't have business in any of the Muslim countries on the temporary suspension. So, no golf course in Yemen. What's that about?
Yeah. Well, I was wondering if you thought that the executive order didn't go far enough.
No, I seriously don't. I mean, these are the countries that have been on this list of particular concern for obvious reasons for a long time. It's only 3 or 4 months. I think it will have to be extended because the point is we need better vetting procedures, and there really is no way to vet, as Breitbart has written about endlessly. I mean, I got to tell you, I don't think it's worth the American taxpayers' money to try to distinguish the Christians from the non-Christians. All of these refugee and asylee cases are riven with fraud, just shocking amounts of fraud. I have a chapter on it in Adios America. And as I wrote in my column in Breitbart, it's not just that we're worried they're going to shoot up a gay nightclub or a community center in San Bernardino, the Boston Marathon, Fort Hood, 9/11. That isn't the only purpose to this. What's the upside? We keep bringing in all of these elderly, sickly, poor people. They aren't even fleeing. They aren't fleeing anything except not as good or free health care in Yemen as in America. We have our own poor people. We have our own elderly. And look at the rest of our party, Alex Marlowe, with Paul Ryan and the rest of them running around trying to cut back on Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. No. How about once you guys start giving us more Social Security earlier and cutting our taxes, then we can resume bringing in the poor of the world.
Now, among my criticisms of Trump in the first couple weeks, and mind you, I give him an A, if not an A- at worst, for the first 2 weeks. I'm very happy. But one of the things
I give him A++++.
And well, I'm going to point something out that I do wish with this rollout of the executive action on immigration and refugees. I do wish he came to the American people and actually walked them through the logic behind it, as opposed to just putting it out in the dead of night as a press release. And I think this left him open to criticism because I think, and tell me if you disagree with this, that one of the problems with conservatives and anyone on the right is they're so ineffective at communicating with people, and we don't try hard enough. I feel like people.
That's a great point. I think that's really good. But I can't fully put the blame. I mean, it's something that has to be figured out and worked around. But when you have the entire media hysterically opposed to Trump, and their idea of giving the other side is, Meghan McCain. or Charlie Sykes, why don't you explain this ban to us? No, they won't put on anyone who can articulately defend Donald Trump or explain Donald Trump, which is, by the way, why they were all, sitting back popping champagne waiting for Hillary to win on election night.
Yeah, well, there's only one circumstance where you're allowed to be an articulate Donald Trump spokesperson. That's if you have to spend 2/3 of the interview explaining why you're not a racist or a white supremacist, even if you have there's zero pieces of evidence. I'm literally looking at a story right now, Ann, that someone sent to me of Nancy Pelosi flat out calling Steve Bannon a white supremacist. There is zero evidence of that. We employ every race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, immigrants at Breitbart. There is no history of this. There's not one shade of evidence. And will this be obsessively played up as a lie on CNN and the rest of the media and the New York Times? Will she be condemned for lying in order to smear someone for political purposes? Of course not. And yet, Ann, if I were to go on TV, this is all I would have to talk about is explaining why I'm not a white supremacist.
I think it would be worth the trouble, and I wouldn't bother explaining. I think the only appropriate response to something like that is laughter. I mean, let Nancy Pelosi prove she's not a space alien. Perhaps Breitbart should exclusively refer to her. Maybe have a breaking news story about her being a space alien. No, this is all they. It's like dealing with a 3-year-old calling you a poopy head. No, you don't go on TV and say, I am not a poopy head, and here is the evidence that I am not a poopy head. Look, you can see my head is absolutely not made of poop. No, you don't have a serious response to this kind of nonsense.
That's wonderful. It's a wonderful explanation, a great way of illustrating it. Once again, Alex Marlow here, special edition of Breitbart News with Ann Coulter, the one and only. Catch her column at anncoulter.com and at Breitbart.com every Wednesday. Great books and #1 bestsellers pretty much across the board. In Trump We Trust, E Pluribus Awesome is the latest. Also, Ann, let's just continue with some of the issues. And I want to get your thoughts on Obamacare, which you were very excited about that being repealed and replaced. I had circled this one on my agenda as an issue where I did think the Republicans could screw this one up, and they're doing their best to prove me correct on this one. Drudge had some tweets that I thought were pretty perceptive, suggesting that it's really Congress's fault. Hard to disagree.
Yeah.
But we were told repeal and replace. They voted on it 50 some odd times. It meant nothing. Now everyone has the power. The Republicans have the power. What are they doing?
No, I know it's very frustrating. They've had 8 years to work on this. I used to think just in this past year because of campaign, the problem with Washington was, you have all these political consultants and pollsters and think tanks, and they really care more about keeping their parking places and their offices than they care about the country, which is why they've been selling the country out to please the donors and the cheap labor advocate all these years. I now think that it's a bunch of morons in the think tanks. I realized, which I also write about in Trump We Trust, the way all these politicians talk about Obamacare. Two things. One is it's already even the free market Republicans, we're living in a capitalist society, and even they think it has to be a program, and we will approve pre-existing conditions. And okay, that's part one. Part two is all the Washington lingo they use, like portability. We need portability. What I loved about Trump at these debates were the very first debate, which I describe in the book. He says you got to be able to buy insurance across state lines. It's crazy. I mean, he even said it in that wacky, ungrammatical way he has that is apparently eminently understandable to millions upon millions of Americans, but leave people like you and me sometimes scratching our heads. But I understood what he was saying. But he's talking about buying insurance across state lines. All the other Republicans on the stage didn't understand what he was talking about. That's all it is, Alex. We just want the free market applied to health insurance, and forget about boring us with your sob story cases. Okay, some of them are genuine sob stories. I don't mean to be unkind about that, but it's a tiny minority of people who just happen to have kids, or
yes,
they themselves
but we can't
are born
make
with some horrible condition.
Yeah, we can't
Let me buy it on the free market the same way I buy shoes and books and milk and by the way, car insurance, renters insurance, homeowners insurance.
Right, exactly. And we can't make all policy based off of a few sob stories, because we could play that game too, and we could win, but we don't play that game because we're trying to think about the 300 some odd million people in this country and what could best serve them. And yes, selectively applying the free markets and deciding this is a human right and this is a fundamental right, even though it's not a fundamental right. The right to health care insurance has never been something that you can't say that comes from God. You can't say that's an inalienable right to health care insurance.
If it is, it's been taken away from me by Obamacare. I mean, the Soviets declared, everything a fundamental human right, and you couldn't get bread. Apparently, describing something as a fundamental human right is the fastest way to make sure there is none of it, and it's very expensive. Sell it on the free market, and you'll have plenty of it and lots of choices and everything you want. And I also loved something that Trump got attacked for in the debates that I also describe in Trump We Trust, that he said, because there are the three categories. Let's see, there are 319 million people in the country are in the category we were just describing. Please just let us buy this product, which is now illegal in America to purchase. That's the letter I got. My health insurance made illegal. Anyway, that's 319 million. Then there are a few million who are incompetent, lazy, have some, they won't have health insurance. Okay, there, as Trump said in the debates, we'll take care of them on a different system. Maybe it's, Medicaid for all of them. Maybe they're poor, they're young, they're millennials. Whatever it is, we're not going to let people die in the street. A sentence that both Ted Cruz and Rand Paul attacked Trump for. Of course, we're not going to let people die in the street, but you don't have to wreck Ann's health care to take care of them. And then the third category, which is the tiniest category of all, are people who just got, a bad hand in life. And, people feel we're happy to help someone who was born with some genetic condition, or as a child born with that sort of condition. That's separate. We'll pay for them. We could give them all $10 million, and it would be cheaper than the current Obamacare.
Now, Ann, I teased before the break that I want to ask you about the establishment, and I saw something that was really troubling. It seems like Joe Scarborough, pretty much the definition of an establishment type, a centrist guy who does the morning TV show that is pretty much watched exclusively by people in Washington. He was going on a tear against Stephen Miller, who's a longtime friend of mine. We both interned for Larry Elder in Los Angeles at about the same time, back to back, growing up in West Los Angeles. Also, in a fact that is not mentioned when we are both described as racist and white supremacists, that we both happen to work for a black gentleman, Larry Elder. But I feel like the establishment trying to scapegoat Stephen Miller for any sort of problems in the White House, it seems dirty, it seems dishonest, and I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on Stephen and any sort of establishment attempts to undermine Trump at this point.
Well, I will give our opposition credit. They have figured out the most powerful nerve center besides Trump himself within the Trump White House. It would be great for them to take out Trump. This is when we ought to be throwing a party for Stephen Miller and saying, congratulations, they can't call you dumb. They realize you're the one. A very important component. Yeah. He's brilliant. What I would like to do is go back to when you and he were growing up in LA and, I don't know, get a hold of the soil conditions or the water or something. Because the two of you, oh my gosh, so patriotic, so smart. You love your country. I was describing Steve Miller to, I don't know, some reporter recently, and I was on the plane at the time. So I was writing out adjectives, and at the end of the sentence, I said, I'm not just listing adjectives. I'm actually pausing and thinking about each one. But the main ones are brilliant and patriotic. And the same with you. And to have that in these young kids out of all places, Los Angeles, and then a few years later, well, I won't even say her name, otherwise she'll start being attacked by,
yes.
by the opposition will figure out the other person they need to take out of the Trump White House. But oh my gosh, thank God, not taking the Lord's name in vain. I mean it literally, that Stephen Miller is on our side. I met him at a restoration weekend. Down in Palm Beach.
Oh yeah, that's one of David Horowitz's hate conferences, right? Where you guys get together and decide who you're going to hate on and discriminate against this year. No, but Stephen Miller is he was a top Jeff Sessions aide. Now he's a top aide to President Trump, and he's someone who really is integral to the intellectual base. The intellectual force behind the Donald Trump rise that no one aside from you and Breitbart and a handful of others and actually gave Trump credit for. And this is why Joe Scarborough is so mad at him. It's not that Stephen Miller did anything wrong or that Scarborough has any insight into it. It's about that Stephen Miller is an effective force inside politics right now, pushing the Republican Party to this anti-establishment, anti-globalist, Trumpian agenda.
Yes, he's very, very bright, and it always struck me. I mean, especially kids from Los Angeles, the very epitome of coastal elites. How seriously and genuinely Stephen Miller cared about working class Americans. I mean, he's such a perfect fit for Trump. And it would just, casually come up in conversation what was driving him crazy, that they were being screwed over. I didn't see that. I'm never up early enough to see Morning Joe. But I did understand that this had happened. I was getting so many emails from people and I didn't even know what it was about at first, because they were just blistering, Tourette'ing emails about how they were never going to watch Morning Joe again. But I don't really understand it, other than I gather the opposition has figured out danger, high IQ, person who loves America.
Yes, and might perhaps upset the apple cart in Washington, which is you see the establishment still trying to hang on for dear life for what control they have. And it's tough times for them because Trump is really setting the stage. He's setting the tone almost single-handedly, which is in a way it's almost a shame a little bit. I mean, it's good for you and me, and because we tend to agree with him more. But you would like it that it just wasn't one guy and a couple advisors who were setting the whole narrative for all of Washington D.C. You'd wish there were more people involved with that shared vision.
Yes, and one thing I probably don't need to worry, because every time I do get worried about something on Donald Trump's behalf, it turns out, didn't need to worry, it's Trump. But, there is the White House bubble, and I was just thinking, I travel a lot. I know a lot of people, and a lot of people from different walks of life. Just this week, I've talked to Hollywood producer and union executive and lots of cab drivers in New York City, Los Angeles, and so on. An actress, a Broadway actress, singer. Okay, I don't need to list them all. But it's been amazing to me how popular the non-Muslim ban is, and how popular Donald Trump is, and in particular with, not that I'm not a liberal. I don't think immigrants' opinions are more important than American opinions. But it's interesting because it's contrary to the media narrative. Lots of immigrants in this country wild about Trump, wild about the Muslim ban. I mean, out there in the middle of the country, he is more beloved than he was the day he was inaugurated. And by the way, got a larger crowd than Obama. I don't know if you've written much about that, but I have the briefing book. It was a much bigger crowd, and we should probably spend the rest of the radio interview allowing me to prove that. But I kind of think he needs a rally in Washington or someplace.
I like this idea.
Go out to America to get.
Well, here's the problem, though, Ann, and this is something that I've talked about in the context of in the context of Trump's rally numbers or the inauguration numbers, which are irrelevant to me because of one reason, is that people who, first of all, live outside of the D.C. Beltway have to travel in further distances. But more importantly, they're intimidated by the threat of actual violence. And I want to ask you about your thoughts on what happened at my alma mater, Berkeley, earlier this week. But in general, this culture that I think has been enabled by the establishment media, CNN and New York Times, first among the list, that if they keep calling people fascist and white supremacists and Nazis, then why wouldn't there be violent riots against them? The problem is they're lying and they're putting innocent people in danger to do it.
No, it is the rise of a genuinely violent fascist movement. And just it would be as if, the Nazis went around complaining about how the Jews were attacking them and oppressing them. That's basically what we have going on now. I was surprised that Trump continued to have, the big event during the campaign was when they shut down that Chicago rally of Donald Trump's.
Right.
And
which Ted Cruz blamed on Trump himself, by the way, which I could never get over that.
Yes. That was really separated the mice from the men. And I think that was when your old mentor, David Horowitz, threw down totally for Trump and said, no, this cannot be tolerated. But it was amazing to me how many families with kids and wives and daughters, they continued to go out to see Trump. It is like my college speeches, something I've been doing for a long time. You'll have 20 speeches that are fine, and then suddenly, bam, the violent mobs show up, and we're going out to dinner. You never know when it's going to happen, so you have to be prepared all the time. But Americans still did come out. And yes, I think that was intended to reduce Trump's crowds, to make it look like he was the one creating the violence. And all of this just for someone who says we have to take care of Americans first. That's what they're so upset about, Alex.
Well, and not just that, they actually want increased immigration and increased refugees from these regions where we know we're not going to be able to vet them perfectly, because that's the alternative to scaling back the refugees and scaling back immigration.
And we also know they're going to be very, very, very expensive while Congress is trying to cut back on Medicare, Social Security. We can't afford that. We can't afford this. We have to raise the retirement age. No, stop. We gave it the office.
Yes, exactly. And the next topic I wanted to talk to you about is along the same vein, which was I just want to get your overall thoughts on what happened at UC Berkeley, the home of the free speech movement, when Milo Yiannopoulos, your friend and mine, Breitbart writer and speaker, when he dared to try to address a crowd for an hour at the left-wing campus. You saw what happened. It was just an explosion of violence. They couldn't even lie and say it started out as a peaceful protest like they like to do. They couldn't even fake it this time. They were smashing ATMs. They were jumping on cars. They were setting fires. Your thoughts?
I believe Trump said it, and I think it's absolutely right. He's got to withdraw all federal funding from Berkeley. This is a genuine threat to democracy when people can't engage in the first of the Bill of Rights, the very first one that's mentioned freedom of speech. And this has been a burgeoning movement, particularly on our college campuses for a long time, in a calm, reflective moment. I think you should do the same thing with any colleges that have speech codes or need special free speech zones, where students or professors are disciplined for engaging in First Amendment speech. This has absolutely been done before. The IRS has been used to say, sorry, if you're collecting student aid, you can't attend these colleges. We're not sending any student aid to these colleges who don't abide by, and those were often kind of silly principles being enforced, like Bob Jones University. It's sort of it's a very sort of hardcore fundamentalist Christian college. I'm a Christian. It has some beliefs that or I used to. I don't know if they still do. But one was from the Tower of Babel. They wouldn't allow interracial dating. So they had blacks, they had whites, and it was mostly black and white country back then. In fact, scholarships for black students, but whites couldn't date black students. Blacks couldn't date white students. And I ought to add, because I looked this up at the time, there was very little dating of any sort. If you went on a date at Bob Jones, you had to have a chaperone with you. Anyway.
Yeah, and there was you couldn't go off campus with someone of the opposite sex. I don't think you could hold hands. I looked into this.
Yeah. So anyway, there was no racial animus to this. It hit both races equally. But for that, the IRS came down like a ton of bricks on Bob Jones University. No federal aid, no through student scholarships, as I recall. A student who had student aid could not attend that college. And now we have a genuine violent fascist movement rising up, and there's not only no punishment, but taxpayers are paying for this? Oh, no. I mean, and second to immigration, the next biggest problem in this country is the universities and the public schools.
Now, Ann, right before I got to Berkeley, you spoke there, and it was a riotous scene. I've never seen footage of the speech itself. I just know that the whole audience, the whole auditorium was filled with protesters. People were shouting at other people with a megaphone. And this was 10, 11 years ago. This was way before Trump. I think people could have seen this Milo riot coming.
I don't remember that.
Yeah. I saw. Well, I have video footage of it, so
really?
I gotta pull it back up. So I
did not know that. You're sure I spoke at Berkeley?
Yeah. Well, okay. Well,
I spoke at a lot of colleges. I forget some of them, but I think I wouldn't necessarily remember it just because it was a room full of protesters. But I don't remember that one. I can name a bunch of other colleges where similar things happen.
Well, I'm pretty positive on this one. In the outside chance I'm incorrect, I don't think that hurts my point. That you're old hat at this thing, and you're very provocative, and you don't go quite to the level of trolling that Milo does. But you could have probably seen that this was coming. And because these campuses now are just so one-sided and they're funded by the government, and they're such bubbles. And I just wanted to get your sense on this encroaching fascism on our campuses and what that means at this point in time.
Well, for one thing, it all comes from the administration of the colleges. There's no question about that. These are not spontaneous movements. It is, described in my book, demonic on groupthink and mob behavior. But these are particularly lickspittle students who want to please the professor. And they know damned well their professors are opposed to everything Ann Coulter says and everything Milo says. And it's just like, presenting a polished apple to the teacher. Oh, teacher, here, I brought you a gift today. I went and protested, Ann Coulter. And they don't really know much because, I mean, what's surprising about Berkeley, I think I would say, is, and I write about this at the beginning of, I think it's, if Democrats had any brains, they'd be Republicans. I described the college speeches, and at the risk of being snobbish, but still telling you what the truth is, it doesn't tend to happen at the Ivy League schools. Berkeley is weird. That is a very weird. That's why I think I would have remembered that, because that would have been a wacky and wild exception to the rule. The worst ones are the Jesuit colleges and the community colleges. I mean, at Harvard and Yale, and I've spoken at both places many times, Wellesley, Smith, my own alma mater, Cornell. The kids are too They want to challenge you intellectually. They'd be embarrassed to throw something. Though I do think there is a new movement kind of sweeping through here. But at some of these schools, we'd be organized. We were ready to go. I'd give the speech. They could stand up at the mics. I would take questions until, they had collapsed from exhaustion. And usually at the tougher schools to get into, that's how they want to be you. They want to ask you a question and outsmart you. It's when it is a 3-year-old who doesn't have the power of speech or logic and just throws food. So it would tend to be the lesser colleges. The other thing is when we would be prepared and have college Republicans and large men prepared to throw out any hecklers, sometimes the members of the administration would stop people, our people who had rented the room, had paid for me to come speak. Someone comes to disrupt it, starts heckling. They try to remove the heckler. And an administrator, this happened at Syracuse University, some dean of students stepped forward and said, you can't remove the heckler because you're interfering with his free speech rights.
Wow. Ann Coulter is my guest. Alex Marlowe, a Breitbart News special on Sirius XM 125. Thanks for joining us. And give me a little more of your sense of what you think are the biggest things on your radar in the news coming up that you think are going to be the big fights for people right of center to get engaged in right now?
Immigration.
What? And you care about immigration the most? This is a surprise to me. My goodness.
And the reason I say that are the two big, obviously, because who gets to live and vote here and collect Social Security and housing aid obviously is the most important issue. Look at what happened to your state, California. But that's the one that's going to get the most opposition because A, it's a lifeline for the Democratic Party. As I describe in Adios America, the Democrats looked around the country about half a century ago, realized they couldn't get Americans to vote for them, so they'd have to bring in ringers. And that's what Teddy Kennedy's 1965 Immigration Act did. After Romney lost, I got to tell you, that night, I thought that was genius, Teddy Kennedy. It was a brilliant plan, that 65 Immigration Act. Evil, but brilliant. And boy, did you snow the Republicans. And thank God we got Trump. I thought we had about a 10% chance to save the country when I wrote Adios America. I now think we're up to 90%.
Wow.
Who would think we could have? The world could change so much. But the work still has to be done. So for one thing, this is the Democratic Party fighting for its life. If they don't get to keep bringing in third worlders or just the third worlders, by the process of these, and I ought to say, since 1970, we've been bringing in more than 1 million immigrants a year. 90% are from the third world, and post-1970 immigrants are voting 8-2 for the Democrats. So this isn't some wild speculation on my part. That is what has happened. That's what happened to your state, California. The state gave us President Nixon and President Reagan. We'll never elect a Republican statewide. Soon that will be the entire country. And it's not just building a wall and not even letting in one more immigrant. Simply through the process of the third world immigrants already here, some of whom are lovely. Glad to have you. Great it's here. But if you're not here legally, or if we don't have to bring you in because you're just coming for cheap health care, not a good idea. Just through the process of the post-1970 immigrants already here, turning 18. Trump loses in 4 years under the exact same conditions, the exact same election, because you look at those, 7 swing states? Pennsylvania was a huge win, but the rest of them were pretty much 47-48.
Yes, they're very close, and we got a lot of work to do. I think that a lot of us are fired up, though. In 2018, the electoral map is looking very good. But here's the big deal, Ann, is that the party now, the Republican Party, seems to be governed by people who are fighters inherently, people who understand that you have to be able to punch the left in the nose when they deserve it. Most of the time they will start it for you. But it's not being pacifist and not being those when they deserve it. Most of the time they will start it for you. But it's not being pacifist and not trying to convince them with a polite op-ed or over a cocktail in Washington, D.C. or in Manhattan. It's sometimes about rolling up your sleeves and fighting. And I don't mean literally fighting in the streets like the way Tim Kaine described it. Whoever writes his talking points should get a pink slip. But what do you think of that? That you've got the Trump, Bannon, Stephen Miller, Breitbart, Ann Coulter, guys like Charlie Hurt, guys like Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson. I mean, these are people who don't just play patty cakes with the left, and that's very cool.
Yes, we need more of them. And I mean, there are 100,000 on the other side. Trump will not get pushed back for one of the other main wonderful things he's doing that no other president would do, and that is bringing jobs back. When he calls these companies and harangues them and makes them build their plants in America, makes them invest in America, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they're not going to come out and denounce Trump. They'll say, oh, it was just 100,000 jobs. It was just 3,000 jobs. Okay, if that's your best argument, no problem. When it comes to immigration, every single entity, the media and the Democrats most of all, because like I say, this is life or death for them, and idiot Republicans who seem to think that we owe, Somalis, Guatemalans, and Mexicans for the legacy of slavery. It's the damnedest thing. No, America, this can't be said often enough. I write about it in Adios America. I have a whole book on it and mugs. The reason we are sensitive, and rightly sensitive, to race in this country is because of the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. African Americans, absolutely. Set aside affirmative action. You can tell us we can't use this word, that word, or the other word. But if you just ran across the border, no, what do we owe you? We didn't do anything to you. In fact, most of what we've done to the rest of the world is save them from tsunamis, from warlords, from earthquakes, massive loans, massive just foreign aid. No. All the. This is the. I mean, at least with the Irish, who were troublesome immigrants as well, at least we were allowed to criticize them. If we hadn't been allowed to criticize the Irish, and including the Irish criticizing themselves, I might add, it was Irish priests whipping those drunkards into shape. Now I think the Irish are among, or are, if not one of the top earning demographics in the country. But no, now we have to treat, every third worlder living off the American taxpayer as if this is an American black we owe for the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. No, we owe you nothing. If you're not black, we don't want to hear about it. And I mean American black.
That's Ann Coulter, ladies and gentlemen. In Trump We Trust. E Pluribus Awesome is her latest book. You also go to anncoulter.com. Check out her column every Wednesday at Breitbart.com. This has been a Sirius XM Patriot 125 special with me, Alexander Marlowe, editor-in-chief of Breitbart News. Thanks a lot to producer Paul for putting this together. Exciting special. Glad to have these long-form talks with one of the great thinkers and a hilarious person in her own right, Ann Coulter. And we got about a minute left. Just I'm turning the floor back over to you. Any other parting comments right now? First couple weeks of Trump, what do you think?
Well, I'm just exhausted from winning so much, Alex. I mean, if this is what the first...
He wasn't joking. I feel the same way. It's literally tiring to me. I'm not getting enough sleep because there's too much winning to do.
I know. We're going to call him and say, President Trump, you've got to stop winning. No, I'm absolutely, positively thrilled. It looks like he is going to keep all the promises. I'm so happy we elected a workaholic, a germophobic, and a cheap Scot, or as we call ourselves, thrifty.
Well done, Ann Coulter. Thanks so much.
Good to talk to you, Alex. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.